Let's take an example. Let's imagine a doctor is watching this program, an African doctor is watching this program in Dubai. Does he have a moral duty to go home and to take his expertise home to help build on what the developed world is giving Africa?
Not at all. He has a moral duty to make sure he can provide for his family to the best that he can, to the best of his ability. As far as what he can do for any given country, at the end of the day, the world just does not work like that. Yep, the brain drain is a massive problem, but what Africa needs to alleviate, well, the problem that we have to overcome is make sure that the economics and political environment is actually is good enough to sustain a profession of that caliber.
Let's make sure we find room to hear from people on the blog as well. Shaima, what's coming in the last few minutes?
Mohammed in Liberia posted on a blog saying, I expect Mr. Obama to implement the following policies in Africa: good governance, enhance accountability on gross domestic products, and equal distribution of wealth, among others. Mudi in Nairobi says, the solution to African problems is not pegged on more aid from the West, rather on internal African paradigms on which Obama has no control. Steve in Boston says, Obama is not king. He's the President of the United States and can do nothing without the approval of the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. And Derek in Trinidad writes on the blog, yes, they expect too much. They see Obama as a superhero who will magically solve their problems.
Shaima, thank you very much. Let's just bring in Brett one last time from the Heritage Foundation. We've heard lots of expectations. Just quickly in 20 seconds, do you think President Obama can ever meet them?
Well, I think that the expectations are unreasonable. Africans need to look to their own governments for the policies that will allow them to seize the opportunities that will allow them to provide for themselves and their families. Obama can only do so much. The United States can only do so much. The future of Africa lies with its people and lies with its governments, and they need to take responsibility for that. Too long, African leaders have pointed abroad for the source of their problems, and they need to take responsibility for what has been successful, but more importantly, what's not have been successful.
A great pleasure having you on the program. Thanks also to Gawain in L'Aquila in Italy, to Tabs in Johannesburg, Christabel in Washington, D.C. The three of you, you told me at the beginning of the program what you wanted. Being realistic, is President Obama going to give it to you? Just very quickly, Nelson.
Given the fact that he saw him with Gaddafi this morning, I know how beneficial corruption actually is and how much healthcare costs are. Being realistic, I don't think there'll be much change.
Alice?
Well, I think he should address the issue of AFRICOM, which is the military base, America's military base in Africa. He should address it and allow Africans to develop.
Tony?
At the moment, we don't know what his policy is towards Africa. So what I've said about the investment is only an expectation. For me, if you ask me, the greatest benefit that his visit is going to give the country now is that of image. It enhances Ghana's image. That is all for now.
It's been a pleasure having you on the program, Nelson and Alice as well. I'm afraid our time is up on today's World Have Your Say. Thanks to all of you who've contributed. Now, we know this isn't a subject that can be opened and closed in half an hour, so if you would like to carry on the conversation, do go to the blog at worldhaveyoursay.com. And you can also watch a special programme about President Obama's trip to Africa on Saturday on BBC World News at 12 GMT. Thanks very much indeed for your company. I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.
It's really sad that we lose such people when it can really be prevented.
Stories that need to be told. Voices that need to be heard. Battles that need to be won. Kill or Cure returns with a brand new series this July on BBC World News.
Every time I come, something has got a bit better, and that is quite an amazing feeling.
Hello. President Barack Obama, on his first visit to sub-Saharan Africa since taking office, has made a powerful call for Africans to stand up for their democratic rights. In an address to the Ghanaian parliament, he said Africa must take charge of its own destiny in the world and that good governance is vital for development. He also visited an historic fort used as a transit point for slaves being sent to America.
Expectant crowds in Ghana today, hoping tight security wouldn't deny them a glimpse of a foreign leader who's being welcomed here like a local hero. President Obama has chosen to visit this quiet, democratic nation because he sees it as a role model for the rest of an often troubled continent.
I'm very happy in the sense that black president, and he chose to come to Ghana. because we understand democracy.
Do you think he can change Africa?
Yes, of course, he can do.
There is real excitement here. With his African heritage, Mr. Obama is an inspirational figure across this continent. Much, perhaps too much, is now expected of him. But Mr. Obama told Ghana's parliament that it was Africa, not the West, that needed to take the lead.
I like this.
A blunt message delivered with the force of a man who straddles both worlds.
Development depends on good governance. That is the ingredient which has been missing in far too many places for far too long. That's the change that can unlock Africa's potential. And that is a responsibility that can only be met by Africans.
But Mr. Obama promised that America would do more to help unlock the continent's potential, mitigate the effects of climate change, and fight disease.
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.
The president and his family then headed to an old slave fort. Michelle Obama's great-great-grandfather was brought in chains from West Africa to America.
To be able to come back here in celebration with the people of Ghana, of the extraordinary progress that we've made because of the courage of so many, black and white, to abolish slavery and ultimately win civil rights for all people.
This was a brief but poignant trip to Africa, Mr. Obama promising much to the continent, but asking even more of it. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Ghana.
Chris Hennemeyer from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems spoke with me earlier. I asked him whether President Obama's heritage positioned him to speak out about Africa's political failings.
Without a doubt, the kind of language we saw from Barack Obama, that Africa's future is up to Africans and that Africans have to shoulder their own responsibility for their post-colonial failures, is the kind of thing that many people have said quietly over the years, but given his part African heritage, he can speak much more bluntly to these issues than his predecessors could.
And what about his decision to go to Ghana? He speaks about Ghana, of course, as a model, but it's not that long ago that you could say Ghana was more of a borderline case. What has Ghana done? What success lessons can be applied elsewhere in Africa?
Yeah, Ghana was a lot worse than a borderline case. I lived there in the late 1970s for 2 years, and at that time it was synonymous with corruption and decrepitude. You couldn't buy a can of Coca-Cola or a roll of toilet paper in Ghana for many years. One thing in particular changed it, and that thing was the former Ghanaian president and military coup leader, Jerry John Rawlings, who ran the country for the better part of, I think, 16 or 17 years, and shook Ghana out of its malaise and handed it over to duly elected civilian governments. And we've now seen 3 successful civilian governments in place since Rawlings stepped down from power. So it's an interesting irony that a strong man had to straighten Ghana out. There are other things that are interesting about Ghana. It's always been a place where ethnic groups have mixed easily, and in fact Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, went out of his way to make sure that nationalism rather than ethnicity was the prime motivator of most Ghanaians. But that doesn't mean Ghana's free from corruption, doesn't mean it's free from ethnic tension. In the '94 elections and elections since, there have been people killed in intertribal fighting.
Chris, just briefly if you can, do you think there'll be a lot of people in Africa, Main Street Africa if you like, who enjoyed hearing Barack Obama talk about the dangers of corruption at the top? He was warning leaders about their behavior. Do you think that might have gone down quite well with the masses?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see tomorrow what the African newspapers and talk shows have to say about this, but clearly he was speaking directly to the people. He was warning them that the days of their leaders ruling without consideration of popular will and engaged in deep corruption, that those days were over, that history was against them. And I think that will be immensely popular. Whether it translates into real change in Africa is something we'll have to wait and see.